Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Lamed Vav discusses some of the psulim of an esrog. It analyzes when certain issues are partial and certain issues are not. It tries to learn additional halachas about psulim of esrogim from the laws of treifos, the tarfos of animals, and it analyzes some of the machlokes which we've seen in the Mishnah. Then we get to the next Mishnah, which discusses tying the three branches, lulav, hadas, and arava together, and explains with what you are allowed to tie them, and introduces a machlokes on the subject, and brings the proof from there. So let's begin the Gemara. The Gemara is discussing the psulim of esrogim. So in the Mishnah, we had seen that one of the psulim is if it has a hole, and the Mishnah said that if it has a hole and something's missing, it's possible. If it has a hole and nothing's missing, it's just that the flesh of the esrog was squeezed when something got stuck into it, and there's a hole left without anything actually taken away from the esrog, that's kosher. So the Gemara quotes Ula Bar Chanina that minimizes that halacha. If it is nothing missing, it's still possible if one of the following two conditions apply. Either the hole goes through or through the esrog, goes all the way through from one into another, or if the hole is the size of an isser, there's a coin, large coin, size of an isser, if you have a hole that big, even if nothing's missing, that means you just stuck a peg into the esrog, and it made that hole, it's puzzle anyway. Now the Gemara has a shayla. Rava asked, what if it has simane tarfos, signs of treif, like that would make an animal treif? Does that make an esrog puzzle or not? So the Gemara is referring to the 18 treifos that we know, halacha Moshe Misinai, that are 18 different injuries that can make an animal be considered not kosher because he's going to die from the injury within 12 months. The 18 injuries fall into various categories. There are holes in certain places, peeling of certain things like the skin, cracks of certain things like the windpipe. So the Gemara says, what type of thing are you referring to? Peeled, we already discussed in the Mishnah on an esrog. Cracked, we discussed in the Mishnah. Hole, we discussed in the Mishnah. What else is there? The Gemara says it's referring to where the entire esrog, the insides of the esrog became soft and it flows and it's mushy like water. The Gemara says you find that halacha in Hilchos Treifos. It says that if the outer membrane of a lung is intact, but the inside became liquidy and it flows like water, so the halacha there is that if the bronchioles, the pipes that carry air into the flesh of the lung, if those are still strong, they're still solid, then it's kosher. But if they also dissolved, then it becomes puzzle. So Gemara wants some of the flesh of the esrog dissolves, including what would be parallel to the bronchioles, which Rashi says is the little compartment where the seeds are kept. That all dissolved, even if the skin is whole, is that considered to be a kosher esrog or not? So what should be the difference? So the Gemara says the esrog is exposed to the air, and therefore it's possible that even in a situation where a lung would be kosher, because it could still heal, where the esrog might be puzzle in that case because it's exposed to the air and it's more likely to rot and spoil. So Gemara wants to bring a proof from a brayso which lists a number of psulim of esrog, and some of the first two. The first two are tafuach and siruach. Gemara will define them and base its proof on that, but let's just discuss the other ones first. The other ones on the list are kavush, if it is pickled in salt water or in vinegar, if it's cooked, if it is a kushi esrog, that's an esrog from Ethiopia, if it's white, so if it's black or white, the kushi esrogim are black, so if it's black or white, it's a psul. If it's spotted, it's a psul. If it's around like a ball, it is puzzle as well. Some say if it is two twin esrogim together, that's puzzle as well. Now, if it's a very small esrog, machlokes Rabbi Akiva, who says it's puzzle, and the Chavim will say it's kosher. And the last thing in the brayso says that if you have it grown in a form, you place the esrog in a form, in a shape of some sort, and it grows into a weird shape, it doesn't look like an esrog, that's a puzzle as well. So now what's tefuach and siruach? So the Gemara assumes that they're both referring to some type of rotting. Tefuach generally means that it swelled, and siruach generally means it became disgusting or it became smelly. So the Gemara assumes it's the same thing, just the swelling affects the outer part of it, and the siruach affects the inner part of it. That being the case, siruach is a psul. Siruach means that the inside rotted, and the rest of it is okay. That was exactly the question that Rava was asking about a lung. Is it like a lung where the inside is rotted and the rest of it is okay? So the Gemara answers that that's not what tefuach and siruach is. Tefuach and siruach is two different conditions that affect it. Tefuach is where the water fell on it, and siruach is where it became wormy and therefore it's smelly. But those are two different conditions that affect it, and neither of them are the one that Rava was asking about. Now, there was a couple of questions here on the Brisa. The Gemara says we said that an Esrog Kushi is puzzle. So the Gemara asks, why do you say that? We have a different Brisa that says that an Esrog Kushi is kosher, but an Esrog that's like an Esrog Kushi is puzzle. That means to say as follows. An Esrog Kushi would mean an Esrog that comes from Ethiopia. An Esrog that looks like an Esrog from Ethiopia would mean a black Esrog. So we would say then that according to this Brisa, a black Esrog from Eretz Yisrael is puzzle, and an Esrog from Ethiopia, even if it's black apparently, is kosher. So why does our Mishnah say that a Esrog from Ethiopia, which is black, is puzzle? So Gemara answers two answers. Abaye says when we say that it's Kushi Esrog, we mean that it's actually from Eretz Yisrael. It just looks like a Kushi Esrog, and therefore it's the same as the Brisa. Rabbi Kiva, Rava says that it's referring to an Esrog that actually comes from Kush, from Ethiopia, and it's kosher for the people in Kush, because that's a standard Esrog there. But here in Eretz Yisrael, or in Bavel, or some other area where that's not the standard Esrog, such an Esrog would be puzzle, it would not be kosher. Okay, the Gemara now focuses on the machlokas between Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim about a very small Esrog, an Esrog that's not fully grown. We said that Rabbi Kiva says it's puzzle, and the Chachamim say it's kosher. Gemara wants to match this up into a very similar machlokas about when you could take meiser. According to Rabbi Shimon, if it's not fully grown, if it's that small size, you can't take meiser from it. It's not chayv in meiser. According to the Chachamim, it is. So the Gemara wants to say that Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shimon say the same thing. They both consider it when it's too small, when it's not fully grown, they consider it to be not a fruit. The Gemara says it's not comparable at all. Rabbi Akiva says that it's a fruit. He just holds that it doesn't count as hadar, and therefore you can't use it as an esrog, but it is chayv in meiser. Rabbi Shimon could hold the other way. He could hold that it counts as hadar. It's a perfectly kosher esrog. No reason not to use it. In meiser, it's a special halacha. You're only chayv to take meiser on something which is grown enough that you can actually plant it and it'll grow. Like we learned, aser to aser is called tivla zarecha. You have to take meiser on grain, on produce which is zarecha, which is growable. And therefore, we're not even going to do that. And the Gemara concludes this discussion with a very firm vesuloi midi, nothing else to say on the subject. There are definitely two different things. Now, on the topic of an esrog which grew in a form and therefore took a weird shape, Rava says only if it grew in a weird shape, not if it took the same normal shape of an esrog. So the Gemara says, well, what are you talking about? Obviously, if it grew in a weird shape, that's what the Mishnah said. It said specifically if it grew in a weird shape. What are you adding? So the Gemara says he's referring to a case where it took somewhat of a different shape, but not really a weird shape, and that would be a situation where it took the shape of a piece of wood or a board or something like that, and that's actually where he says that it is that it's kosher. That's what he is referring to when it's a normal shape. Now the Gemara has two versions of the next Gemara discussing what happens if there's a piece missing from the esrog. Gemara says that Rav Chanina ate a piece of the esrog. He dipped it in salt water and he ate it, and he still used it as the esrog shell mitzvah. So obviously he held that it's kosher even though it's missing a piece. Gemara says that contradicts our Mishnah. Mishnah said if it's missing a piece, it's puzzle. Gemara said there's two different things. The first day it has to be whole, can't be missing a piece because the Torah said lakachtem lachem, it has to be lakichatam, the whole esrog has to be there. The later days is there Rabbanan, there's no psal of other things. There's no psal of it being chaser, and you could use it, and that's what Rav Chanina was referring to. Now the two versions are, what did Rav say? So according to the first version, Rav said that if a mouse ate part of the esrog, it doesn't count as hadar, and because it's not beautiful. The Gemara says that that's different. Is that even the first day is possible for sure because it's missing, it doesn't qualify. Even the second day is where Rav Chanina ate a piece of the esrog. If it's eaten by a mouse, it's different because that's disgusting. Therefore, it's not hadar. According to the second version, Rav said that it is hadar. He did not differentiate between mice and people. The Gemara said that he goes to Rav Chanina, and that Rav Chanina is not difficult from the Mishnah for the reason that we said, because it's referring to the later days, not the first days. Okay, now the Gemara refers back to our original Mishnah where we had said there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir what the minimum size of an esrog is. Is it the size of a walnut, according to Rabbi Meir, or the size of Rabbi Yehuda, or the size of an egg, according to Rabbi Yehuda? The Gemara just points out the same size machlokes exists about bringing stones into the bathroom on Shabbos to use to clean oneself. You're allowed to bring a minimum amount of stones. We're referring to a situation where it's only asur d'Rabbanan to carry the stones. It's a carmelist. There's no walls to make it a shos yachid. And the machlokes is what is, because you're allowed to bring the minimum amount that you need because of kavod habrius. There's no gzeira d'Rabbanan, so that you should be able to be clean and respectful. But that's only a minimum amount. So what's the minimum amount? So the Gemara says it's the same machlokas applies there, whether it's the size of a walnut or the size of an egg. Now, the Gemara now quotes that Rabbi Akiva brought a gigantic esrog to the base medrash on Sukkot. He brought one that was so big he had to carry it on his shoulders. So how does that fit with our Mishnah that had said that there's maximum sizes, it can't be too big? So Gemara says it's not a kasha, because Rabbi Yehuda had said to him at the time, that's not hadar, that's not a hadar esrog, you can't bring that, that's not hadar. Now, Rashi points out, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold you need hadar, as we said in the Gemara earlier, Rabbi Yehuda does not hold that there's a psul of hadar. What he meant to say is that even meaning Rabbi Yehuda holds that such a big esrog is possible because you have to be able to switch hands, like we'd seen in a brisa earlier. Rabbi Yehuda's tainat, Rabbi Akiva was even going to you don't need to switch hands, but it's not hadar. Such a gigantic esrog is not considered beautiful, it's too big. Okay, now we get to the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses what could use to tie the branches of the three minim, the three of the four minim which are branches, what can you use to tie them together? So Gemara quotes Tanakama says that you have to use something from the three minim, which would be a leaf of the lulav, would be the most practical thing to use. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, the Mishnah says. Rabbi Meir says you could use anything. You could use a string, you could use a piece of rope, you could use a strap, whatever you want. And Rabbi Meir wrote a proof to himself. He said there was an incident that happened where the people of Yerushalayim used to tie their lulavim together with a string made of gold as a way of beautifying it. So you see, obviously, it does not have to be from the lulav. And the Gemara says that they answered him and said, no, that tie was just for decoration. It wasn't actually holding the lulav together. There was something else that was holding the lulav together, and this was over that. Now, the Gemara explains what is the reason that you have to use the min of the lulav. You have to use a lulav leaf to tie it together, according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says because Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is a mitzvah to tie it. Part of the mitzvah is to tie it. And therefore, whatever you're using to tie it is doing a mitzvah. And if you use a different min, that's bal taisef. If you're using a fifth min to do part of the mitzvah of the lulav. It's got to be one of these four minim, because it's a mitzvah to tie it. You can't use something else because it would be bal taisef. If it wouldn't be a mitzvah to tie it, you could just use whatever you want. That's not a problem, and that's what Rabbi Meir holds. Now, says the Gemara, that would be why the gold wasn't a problem, because that wasn't holding it together, wasn't doing the mitzvah. Now, says the Gemara that Rava said you're allowed to use the ivy that goes around the trunk of the palm tree, that's the lulav tree, and you could even use a strip of bark of the palm tree. The Gemara says, how do you know that counts as part of the min for this halacha? The Gemara says because we have another machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda as to whether or not you have to use lulav branches or arba minim for the schach. Now Rabbi Yehuda says you have to use arba minim for the schach, yet Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to use boards. So obviously those boards are referring to the trunk of a lulav tree, and therefore that's my proof that it's considered to be part of the same min, because he says again you're allowed to use it for schach even though it has to be part of the lulav, and therefore you could also use it to tie the lulav together, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now the Gemara just fills out this machlokas here between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says you're allowed to use whatever you want for schach, any type of thing that is growing from the ground and not makabel toma. Rabbi says it has to be from the four minim, and its proof is kal v'chomer. The halachos of lulav are easier than the halachos of sitting in the sukkah. You only have to take lulav and esrog during the day of sukkah. Sitting in the sukkah has to be done even at night, so it's stricter halachos. So stricter halachos, which should have at least the restrictions through kal v'chomer, it should have the restrictions that the four minim have. Just like the four minim can only be these four species, the sukkah schach could also only be made from these four species. The Gemara says it's not a kal v'chomer because your kal v'chomer ends up bringing a leniency that you didn't mean to have, because then if somebody can't find the four species to make a sukkah, he's not going to sit any sukkah at all. So you're creating leniencies. You can only make strictnesses with a kal v'chomer, not leniencies. And second of all, we have a pasuk that clearly describes the sukkah was made out of other things. It's a pasuk in Ezra where he said, "Tzu hahar, go to the mountains v'aviyu, and bring ali zayas, leaves of a olive tree, v'ali eitz shemen, and the leaves of an oil tree, ali hadas, ali tamarim, ali eitz avos, and bring hadas branches, palm branches, that's lulavim, and eitz avos, he was referring to aravos." So he says to bring the three branches that are in the four mina, but he also says to bring ali zayas and ali eitz shemen. Those are not from the four mina. So you see, clearly Ezra was saying you're allowed to make the sukkah of other things. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is not impressed by that. Rabbi Yehuda says that was talking about the walls. The Daled Minim that he mentioned, the four at least, was for the Schach. And the other things were for the...
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.